I do advocate for a species-specific, biologically appropriate diet for our species. All animals have a species-specific diet, something that they eat specifically, and we are no different. And so it's very important to identify what that is, and I think all the best evidence shows that that is actually a carnivorous diet, eating mostly, if not exclusively, fatty meat. And that's what people have been doing since the dawn of humanity. And whatever you've been doing forever, that is what you're used to doing. That's what you're biologically adapted to doing, because that's how nature works. If you're not adapted, if you're not biologically evolved to eat a certain way, you're going to die. You're not going to make it. It's survival of the fittest. And so whether or not we were adapted to this way of eating 2 million, 3 million years ago, after 2 to 3 million years, we damn well are now. And so anyone saying that, no, actually eating something that didn't exist 50 years ago, that's what you need to do, you can just write them off as a lunatic. Meat has always provided essential nutrients, right? So this is something that we require, okay? How do we know this? Well, the Inuit exist, right? There are no plants in the Arctic Circle. There are no plants during an ice age in an Arctic Circle. What plants were available for the people who crossed the land bridge from Asia to North America during the last ice age? There were none. So obviously, if you can't get everything that you need in the proportion that you need them from meat, then you can't survive. You can't live generationally, and we don't exist. We're not here right now. None of our ancestors would have made it through the numerous ice ages, and the Inuits wouldn't exist right now, but they do. And many other examples of humanity do, like the Maasai there. And so animal-based diets, but they provide the nutrients. We're evolved, we're biologically designed to eat these things, and there are a number of different examples of that. A number of different people, such as the Inuit, such as the Maasai, such as the Nanette, the native Australians. These people are well documented to be eating a lot of meat, and they would know which plants to eat, maybe used medicinally, or if they were at a point of starvation. And so a lot of people will say, well, they had access to these things, sometimes they ate them, therefore they were eating them all the time. Well, you can't say that about the Inuit, because they just never had them. So it's always a good example, always good to think about the Inuit or the Nanette or people living during an ice age. And one of the main things is they did not have chronic disease at all. So there are a number of accounts going back hundreds of years that found that these populations did not get the so-called diseases of the West. And that's what they had to call them, because only people in Western countries were getting these diseases. These people were not. Now, since they've been incorporated into Western society, they're eating more Western food, Western alcohol, Western sugar, Western seed oils. They're getting Western diseases. Right now we just call them getting older. But they are missing many essential nutrients: B12, D3, K2, retinol, which is vitamin A, DHA, EPA. We touched on those. Those are the essential omega-3s that you have to have, that you cannot get from plants. And we don't really make them well ourselves. We need them from the food that we eat. Retinol, vitamin A, people think, well, what about beta carotene? Can't you turn that into vitamin A? Yeah, but only 55% of people can. Fully 45% of human beings cannot convert beta carotene into retinol. They have to get it from meat. You can't get it from anywhere else. So what does that mean? That means we have to eat meat, right? We have to eat it to get B12 too. That doesn't exist. D3 doesn't exist. Well, vitamin K, we get that from kale, right? Vitamin kale, no. Kale has K1, and just like ALA, that's an omega-3, but it's not the right omega-3. K1 is not the right vitamin K. We need K2, and we can't really convert K1 into K2. So we need it again from our meat. So any nutritionist, and this is sort of the crux of this discussion, any nutritionist who advocates for a plant-based diet or even a plant exclusive diet is ignoring those fundamental facts. They're recommending a diet that is fundamentally deficient in basic nutrients. How can you call yourself a nutritionist if you're advocating for a diet that is devoid of nutrients? How can you say that that's an optimal diet, that that's a good diet, or even an appropriate diet for anyone at any stage in life if it is fundamentally deficient in nutrients? But the problem is they do. A lot of people do, and a lot of these colleges of nutritional sciences advocate for a plant-based diet. One of the reasons we have these dietetics associations, and they argue for plant-based diets. They say the healthy benefits of a vegetarian diet, and they even say that it was a well-designed vegan diet should be the best diet for you. And yet, they recognize, well, you do have to be careful with B12, D3, K2, vitamin A, iron, and all these other sorts of things. But if you take care of those and you supplement, it should be fine, which is a bit ridiculous for a nutritionist and a nutritional body to suggest that. And they'd also say about the low carbohydrate diet, this is a fad diet, there's no scientific evidence, and yet there are thousands, literally thousands of studies in humans showing the benefits, the medical benefits of a ketogenic diet in humans. And they've actually had to change that recently, because now a ketogenic diet is in the national schedule for diabetes treatment in Australia. It's part of the guidelines, right? So they had to sort of walk that back. But you see the sort of the biases, right? They basically they show no evidence for why a low carbohydrate diet is a fad, but then they say a vegan diet, which is nutritionally devoid, that this is a good diet for these reasons. And they listed previously, before they took this down, they listed 4 studies. Every single one of those studies was actually funded by or written by someone from Sanitarium Foods, someone from the food companies, or someone from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Majority of these studies come from compromised sources. A lot of them will come from processed food companies that are trying to push their own agenda. Coca-Cola alone spends 11 times the amount of money on nutritional research every year than the NIH, the National Institutes of Health in America. That's just Coca-Cola. There's Nestle, there's Pepsi, there's Kellogg's, there's Sanitarium, there's all these other sorts of food companies. They're all pumping out research. They're all funding research. They're all paying universities to do research. Okay, so the majority of these research studies are biased. If we go back to our friends at Maasai, they were part of the only study that I know of that actually compared what we're talking about, which is a whole food meat-based diet and a whole food plant-based diet. And that was in 1931, really hasn't done anything since then. And that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And there's a British study, and they looked at the Maasai, and they had a very good example there, because the Maasai are largely eating meat, blood, dairy, and not much else. But their neighbors, the Akikuyu, were almost the polar opposite. They ate a lot of plants. They had a lot of tubers and leaves and seeds and nuts and all these sorts of things. So they were largely plant-based, alive at the same time in the same area. And this is late 1920s, 1930. So this wasn't the era of industrial agriculture and crop farming and pesticides and insecticides and fertilizers, all these sorts of things. It's a vegan's dream. They're out on a commune in the middle of Africa, just living off the land, right? And it was also very interesting because they were genetically similar or near identical, because they actually intermarried. And so they would go back and forth. So genetically, they were a very similar population. They ate very different diets. Everything else was about the same. So it was a very good, somewhat self-controlled trial. And they looked at them, they looked at their health, they looked at their development, and they found that the Maasai were on average 5 inches taller, brains were larger, they were 50% stronger, and they were on average 23 pounds heavier of lean body mass. There is no fat on these guys. It's only lean body mass. They had full, well-developed jaws, no tooth decay, big, bright white teeth. They don't have dentists. They don't have teeth whiteners or anything like that. They're eating what they're supposed to eat, and their mouth is working the way it's supposed to work. The opposite was true of the Akikuyu. They were shorter, they were weaker, they were more sickly, they had crooked teeth, decaying teeth, they had vitamin deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies, they were anemic, they were getting infections, they were getting diabetes, they were getting all these problems that the Maasai simply were not. And the British tried to supplement them and say, okay, well, we'll take care of your supplements. This is what the dietitians say. Okay, this is a deficient diet, but if you supplement, then you'll be fine. Well, it wasn't fine. They didn't actually improve their health. It wasn't until they replaced the plants with meat that they actually improved their health outcomes. So that's the only study that I'm aware of that actually compares what we're talking about. A meat-based diet, a whole food meat-based diet, and a whole food plant-based diet. The other studies are looking at comparing processed food garbage diet with more plants, right? Because you're comparing it to the norm. That's what they're looking at. You eat more plants and you do better than the average person. The average person is sick. The average person is unhealthy. 93% of Americans have at least one metabolic disease. 70% are overweight or obese. So you don't want to compare yourself to the norm. So the Seventh-day Adventist Church has actually set up more than 20 different plant-based food companies. They are the origin of the processed food movement. So Kellogg and his brother made cornflakes and a lot of other different sorts of cereals that came along with this. There was something like 36 different cereal companies came up around Battle Creek, Michigan during this time because they're all influenced by Kellogg. One was Sanitarium Foods here in Australia. It's one of the larger food producers, processed food producers in Australia. They are still owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but they've had so much more influence since then. We know now that they've had undue influence on most of the major dietary guidelines and decision-making processes of the last century. And in fact, it gets worse than that because the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics in America was actually founded by the Seventh-day Adventist Church members. So the entire field of nutritional sciences and dietetics was founded by these people who are religiously anti-meat. The McGovern Committee, or the McGovern report, which was the original attack against fat and meat. This was the first government-sanctioned advice to the public to say, hey, you need to reduce the amount of fat that you're eating. You need to get more healthy grains and vegetables and fruits and things like that. So the problem with that is the main author in that report was a Seventh-day Adventist member. Then we have Nathan Pritikin. Does anybody know who Pritikin is? Well, he was a professor at Loma Linda University. I don't know if he was a Seventh-day Adventist member, but he was certainly influenced by them, and he taught at a school that does not allow anybody except Seventh-day Adventists to go there. So he at least had some very strong ties with them, and he also testified for the McGovern Committee. These are the people that are pushing forward, the food pyramid sort of ideas, right? This is where they came from. Okay, so they started the institution. They wrote the textbook, they wrote the curriculum, and they have been perpetuating it ever since. That book is still in print in its current edition. That current edition is still being taught. Sally Norton, who people may know, she wrote a book called Toxic Superfoods. It's all about all the different toxins that are in plants. She was a nutritionist. She went to Cornell University, an Ivy League institution in America, and studied nutrition, got a master's, and she was just learning, just eat plants, just eat plants, just eat plants. And she was getting sicker and sicker and sicker until she almost died in her 30s from the amount of toxins that were in these plants that she was eating that were supposedly the most healthy thing that she could eat. That was her textbook. And lifestyle medicine was founded by the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 2003, and it was for this direct purpose of pushing a plant-based agenda in medicine. So it sounds good. You want to change your diet, you want to eat right, you want to exercise. Okay? Sounds good. I advocate for the same thing. But what they're telling you to eat is more grains, more fruits, more vegetables, less meat. Go vegan, start exercising, and you'll be right. And you won't be. This was fun. So people may have seen that. Goldman Sachs asked in a report, is curing patients a sustainable business model? Right? So in that report, they said, well, it's great to think about this. We can take, gene therapy and just cure a disease, and that's wonderful. However, you don't get return customers. So is this a good business model? Is this what we should be spending money on, actually curing things? Or should we be putting things forward to treat the symptoms perpetually, these chronic disease states, and just treat the symptoms like diabetes, like heart disease, blood pressure, statins. They're trying to put everybody on statins. If a child has high LDL, they want to put them on a statin. That's actually a recommendation now. And that's because it's just like any drug dealer. You hook them early and you get them for life, right? And so that's what they want. They don't want to cure disease. Right here, they just said it. They don't want to cure disease. They want to be profitable. So they're not going to help you. Doctors in general are going to try to help you, but they're being influenced by these guys, okay? They don't even realize that they're being influenced by these guys or who they're being influenced by. They don't realize they're being influenced by industry, or there's a religious agenda behind it, or that there's a financial agenda behind it. These are the drugs that we have. These are the pills that we have available, and that's great because it gives them a tool in their arsenal to go and face the world and face these sorts of diseases, not understanding that it's by design that these are never going to fix a problem. We have more medicines, more surgeries, more people working on these problems, and people are getting fatter and sicker and less healthy. And actually the average life expectancy is starting to come down. We are designed to eat meat. It provides all the nutrition required and nothing harmful that we don't, and that's important because there are other things that cause harm. You want the things that are beneficial to you, and you want to exclude the things that are harmful: smoking, drinking, drugs, plants, right? Not everybody gets that, but can we eat any of these plants out there? Make a salad out of that tree? It's a plant, it's a vegetable, it's a leafy green, it's literally green leaves, right? Why don't we understand that for the last 200 years, we've studied the amount of oxalates that are in spinach and how harmful they can be, and how all the different people that have died of acute oxalate poisoning from spinach and other sorts of plants. Liam Hemsworth put himself in the hospital after 3 weeks of spinach smoothies, massive kidney stones and acute oxalate poisoning. Okay, but no one talks about that. No one talks about the normal defense chemicals that are inherent in every single plant that can cause harm to varying degrees. And you can get by, and you can do okay. But that's like saying, saying that, well, you can eat plants, you can eat vegetables, you can do just fine. That's like saying you can smoke and drink and do just fine because it didn't kill you, right? I saw a guy smoking the other day. He didn't die. He didn't drop dead, right? You can do this for decades. But it is over years, over decades, that you build up this damage to your body. Your body can deal with a lot. Our bodies are great. They're designed for it. But the problem is that you can keep damaging yourself, and this will build up, and you will have problems. And you will get 93% of people being metabolically sick. You will get 70% of people being overweight and obese. Okay? It adds up.